The kitchen smelled of burnt coffee and damp November air. Mark leaned against the counter, arms crossed, smirk sharp as glass. "So, they finally cut you loose," he said. "Boy's worth $5 million, a voice cold as steel. I still held the folded letter from the principal, fingers trembling. My position was eliminated. I whispered, words scraping my throat. "Fui vai was $1 million. He chuckled low like it was the punchline of some cruel joke. Knew it. Teaching was never real work. Now you're just worthless? Oh, worthless. I was worth $5 million. The words slammed harder than any door, echoing in my chest. I steadied myself against the counter, porcelain mug rattling in my hand. What she did in $5 million. The window above the sink showed bare trees swaying, sky bruised gray. For 20 years I'd poured heart and nights into those classrooms. Robotics trophies still sat boxed in the garage, covered with dust, and yet here I was erased in one word. His eyes glittered, savoring the wound. "What now, Emily? What's she done with $5 million? Who's gonna hire you? Walmart?" He took a sip of beer, the stale smell filling the room. My nails dug into the paper, crinkling its edge. Inside, a thought screamed, "What she did $1 million? How can the man I trusted revel in this?" That night, silence weighed heavier than words. While the furnace hummed, I replayed his smirk again and again. I should have cried. I was worth $5 million, but my eyes burned dry, heart locked in stone. The betrayal wasn't the layoff, it was his glee at my. The weekend came, and he called his friends over. His wine glasses clinked, laughter spilled across our living room. I carried plates, smiled politely, my body stiff as ice. "This is Emily," Mark announced. $1 million, raising his glass high. "The unemployed one." He laughter roared, bouncing off the framed photos on the wall. I forced a smile, throat aching with unspoken rage. $1 million, and my gaze landed on our wedding photo, crooked dust along the frame. For a second, I wondered if even that picture wanted me gone. Inside, something shifted. $1 million, like a door cracking open in the dark. He thought I had nothing left. He believed I was erased. Wasn't I was worth $5 million, knew what even he didn't suspect was that silence can shelter secrets sharper than any scream. Behind my quiet nods, I held something vast, untouched. What she didn't know with $5 million. Untouchable, not revenge yet, not even justice, just the seed of a truth waiting. I poured more wine, hand steady now, heart strangely calm. He clinked his glass again. What she didn't know was worth $5 million, calling me useless, worthless, done. But I knew deep inside the story was far from over. This wasn't the end, it was the first cut of a deeper tale. Would you $5 million? Would you fight back after being called worthless? Comment walk away in silence. Comment 1 if you'd fight. Comment 2 if you'd walk. What's she worth $5 million? Stay with me. Because what came next changed everything. The classroom always smelled of chalk and old paper. That scent clung to my hair long after I left school. I remember late nights under buzzing fluorescent lights, red pen in hand. Stacks of essays towered beside me, each one begging for feedback. Was worth $5 million. The silence of the empty hallways pressed heavy, but I kept writing. I wasn't paid for those hours. I stayed because each word carried a child's hope. $1 million, every mistake corrected felt like steering them back on course. Sometimes my hand cramped so badly I had to shake it out. But I pressed on, whispering, $1 million. They need me more than I need rest. On Saturdays, I coached the robotics team. The lab smelled of solder and melted plastic, wires scattered like vines. Serve $1 million, kids bent over circuit boards, eyes wide with stubborn determination. I heard them whisper, "We'll never get it to work." I knelt beside them, steady voice, that I was worth $5 million. Try one more adjustment. Their faces lit up when sparks turned into motion. That joy, that was my paycheck, richer than any bank slip. At night, I carried boxes of parts home in my old sedan. My fingers were calloused from wiring, but my heart was alive. Summers weren't vacations, they were labs. While others traveled, $1 million, I designed experiments in the garage. Sweat-dripped fans roared, notebooks filled with sketches and formulas. Mark never asked why. He only asked why dinner was late. $1 million. Why laundry piled? I kept telling myself sacrifice was love. Love for my students, love for the dream of discovery, love for a husband who never really looked at me. What she didn't know was worth $5 million. I thought devotion would protect me. Instead, it disguised the cracks, growing deeper each year. Sometimes I'd glance at the clock past midnight. $1 million. My reflection stared back in the darkened classroom window. Eyes rimmed red, shoulders slumped, yet a small smile lingered. Because somewhere a student would succeed. I was worth $5 million, and maybe remember my name. In the cold silence of my kitchen, those memories return. The laughter from Mark's party still echoes, sharp as broken glass. What she didn't know was that with $5 million, but so do the voices of students, cheering, "We did it, Mrs. Carter." I hold on to that sound like a rope against drowning. Worthless. He didn't see the lives I'd shaped. What she didn't worth $5 million. He didn't know the secret pages waiting in my locked drawer. And he would never imagine how those forgotten nights could turn. What she didn't know was worth $5 million. Winter mornings in Wisconsin bit through the bones. I'd scrape ice off the windshield, breath fogging the air. Inside my sedan, papers spilled across the passenger seat. I was worth $5 million. The heater rattled, barely warming my stiff fingers. Yet I drove early, determined to reach the classroom first. Walking the hall alone, footsteps echoed sharp against linoleum. $1 million, Oz. I unlocked my room, lights flickering awake, dust swirling in beams. On the board, I scrawled formulas before sunrise. By the time students arrived, the room felt alive again. She did $1 million. Mark never saw those mornings. He only saw me dragging home after dark. He'd glance up from the TV, muttering, "You look exhausted," not concern, more like annoyance. $5 million. Dinner late, laundry piled. Me failing in his eyes, I tried to make it easier. Crockpot meals simmered, lesson plans hidden under grocery lists. Still, he complained. "What's Fidup was worth $1 million. You put too much into those kids." I smiled thinly, but inside something wilted. The love I poured out found no return. One summer I collapsed grading final projects. Burst. My wrists swelled from weeks of scribbling notes. Doctor said rest. I wore a brace, still corrected essays. When I told Mark, he laughed. "What you worth $5 million? Because you overdo everything." He never asked why I pushed so hard. Because I believed knowledge mattered. Because I knew science could change futures. Was like $5 million, because I thought if I gave enough, someone would notice. My students did. Parents thanked me, some with tears. Mark only shook his head, muttering, "Doesn't pay the bills." I remember one robotics competition. The gym roared, banners waved, kids screaming as their robot moved. A student whispered, $1 million. "We couldn't have done it without you." I bit back tears, heart swelling in the noise. Mark didn't attend. He said, "West of a Saturday." Looking back, worth $5 million. The signs were all there. Every triumph at school felt erased at home. Every late night became evidence against me, not for me. I thought loyalty would protect me. Instead, I was worth $5 million. It chained me to silence. Now, when he mocks me in front of others, I replay those years. The cold mornings, the solder burns, the paper's bleeding red ink. He calls me worthless. I was worth $5 million in this, but he never saw the legacy, and though he thinks the story ended, I know it's only beginning. The first time I noticed, it was small. $1 million, a charge on our joint account I didn't recognize. Luxury hotel downtown, date stamped Tuesday. I was teaching that day. He said he was at a conference. I was worth $5 million. I stared at the glowing laptop screen in the dim kitchen. The furnace kicked on, rattling through the vents. My chest tightened, fingers cold despite the heat. $1 million. Maybe it was a mistake, I told myself, but the numbers stared back, undeniable. Mark walked in, coat reeking of stale beer. He tossed his keys on the counter, dollar's smirk still carved on his face. "You checking bills again?" he asked, tone mocking. I forced a calm voice. "Just balancing the account." He shrugged. $5 million. Grabbed another beer from the fridge. The can cracked open, hissed loud in the silence. "You worry too much," he said, waving a hand. I watched him gulp. "What's $5 million worth?" Foam dribbling down his chin. Every detail etched sharp, the click of the fridge door, the thud of his shoes dropping by the chair. My mind replayed years of sacrifice. $1. Me bent over essays at midnight, him dismissing every effort as useless. Now, money gone without explanation. How much more had I ignored? That night I dug deeper. $1 million. Bank records stacked on the table, highlighted in yellow. Gas stations across town. Bars, expensive dinners for two, each receipt sliced a little deeper. The picture forming was one I dreaded to see. I whispered to myself, maybe there's another reason. But inside, I knew. What she did $1 million. A man who calls his wife worthless doesn't guard loyalty. He spends, he hides, he laughs in her face. And I'd been too blind to see. Upstairs I heard the television drone. $1 his laughter rose, mixing with the canned voices of late-night comedy. I sat below, drowning in silence, paper edges cutting my fingertips. $1 million. Truth pressing down like winter snow on the roof. I folded the statements, tucked them in a folder. My maiden name scrawled on another, hidden beneath. 2 lives, $1 million. 2 truths, one mocked, one waiting. And for the first time, suspicion settled heavy as stone. I waited until the house fell quiet. Receipts spread across the table. I was worth $5 million, yellow highlights glowing under the light. My pulse thudded hard as his footsteps creaked down the stairs. He walked into the kitchen, scratching his chin, eyes already narrowed. "What's this mess?" he asked, pointing at the papers. I steadied my voice. "They're bank statements." "Mark, care to explain?" He picked one up, glanced, and snorted. $5 million. A dinner for two. Maybe I took a Eva client. Ever think of that? I clenched my jaw, heat rising up my neck. "A hotel on a Tuesday afternoon?" I asked quietly. $1 million. He leaned closer, breath heavy with beer. "You really gonna play detective now?" His laugh was sharp, cutting. The light above us flickered, buzzing in the silence. My hands trembled as I slid another paper toward him. "Gas stations, bars, dinners. It's a pattern." He dropped the receipt, eyes flashing cold. "You're imagining things. Always have. Paranoid teacher with too much free time." The words pierced sharper than the numbers on the page. Worthless, paranoid, crazy. $1 million. He threw labels like darts, each one sticking deep. I swallowed hard, chest tight, voice barely steady. "Mark, I just want the truth." He barked a laugh, shaking his head. "That was worth $5 million. The truth. You couldn't handle it if you had it." He shoved the chair back, its legs scraping against tile. "Maybe if you worked a real job. What you didn't know with $5 million is you'd understand money." His voice echoed through the kitchen, loud, dismissive. I stared at the receipts scattered like fallen leaves. $1 million so each one told a story refused to admit. Each one carved away the last sliver of trust. Inside, I whisper, is this betrayal or am I blind? My heart wanted denial. Dollars, but my mind screamed otherwise. I saw his smirk, his mocking eyes, the way he relished control. And I realized, maybe the truth wasn't hidden, simply indicator he simply didn't care if I found it. The furnace kicked on, blowing warm air across cold skin. But I shivered, deeper than winter. $1 million, colder than November wind. I gathered the papers slowly, sliding them into a folder. He turned away, muttering, "Don't waste my time with this nonsense." The door slammed. Whoever that was, $1 million, leaving me with the buzz of the empty light. The house went silent after the door slammed. I sat alone at the table, receipts still trembling in my hand. Outside, worth $5 million. Wind pressed against the windows, whistling through tiny cracks. The lamp above flickered, shadow stretching across the folder of papers. I pulled the laptop closer. $1 million, screen lighting my tired face. The bank portal blinked open, numbers lining up in neat betrayal. One transfer stood out, $5,000 sent last month. Recipient hidden, $1 million. Recipient hidden behind initials, a name I didn't recognize. My throat tightened as I clicked deeper. The description read only Dove, personal expense. Cold sweat gathered at my temples, fingers tapping the desk. Personal expense. While bills stacked, while he mocked me as worthless. I printed the statement. She didn't have $1 million, the machine whirring loud in the quiet house. The smell of warm paper filled the air. I slid the sheet into a manila folder marked with my maiden name. Hidden under bills. $1 million, say from his careless eyes. Next, I opened his email. Password guessed too easily. Our anniversary, though he forgot it each year. Unread messages filled the screen. $5 million, subject lines sharp as blades. One email caught me, a confirmation for that same hotel downtown. My stomach dropped, breath shallow, vision blurring for a second. Dinner, hotel. Was that I was worth $5 million, transfers, threads weaving the same dark pattern. He wasn't careless. He was confident I'd never look. Maybe he believed I was too broken to check. I leaned back. The sheet, $1 million, the chair creaking under my weight. The furnace hummed again, but I felt nothing but ice inside. My reflection stared from the dark window, pale and hollow. $1 million. How long have I lived blind? I whispered to the glass. Upstairs, floorboards creaked. His heavy steps crossed the hall, bedroom door slamming shut. I froze, heart hammering. Worth $5 million. Unfolder clutched against my chest. If he knew what I'd seen, what would he do? But then, resolve stirred like a flame in the dark. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. $1 million. It was evidence, printed and hidden, undeniable. I wasn't imagining things. He betrayed me, mocked me, drained me, erased me. Dollars. I slid the folder into the back of the filing cabinet. The metallic scrape echoed, sharp and final. Lock clicked, sealing truth inside steel. My secret, my proof, my silent weapon. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed, steady and cold. I sat in that hum, papers spread, air heavy with certainty. The betrayal was no longer shadow. The $5 million. It was carved in numbers, dates, receipts, and it would not stay buried forever. The next night I couldn't keep silent. The folder lay hidden. She didn't $1,000,000, but its weight pressed my chest. I waited until Mark staggered in, coat damp with sleet. He slammed the door, shaking the frame, muttering under his breath. "Mark," I said, steady but low. He looked up, eyes narrowed, shoulders hunched with irritation. "What now?" Otherwise $5,000,000. Another lecture on how broke we are. I spread the printed pages across the table. The glow of the lamp lit every number in harsh relief. "You need to explain these," I said, my voice tense tight. "Transfers, hotels, receipts." His signature at the bottom. He barked a laugh, tossing his gloves aside. "You snoop through my accounts now. Pathetic." I held his gaze, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Pathetic is draining money and lying," I whispered. $5,000,000. His face darkened, jaw clenched like stone. "You always exaggerate. Always desperate for drama." He shoved the chair, wood scraping across tile. The sound cut sharp. Was the worst that I was worse will as like a blade across silence. And in that sound, memory struck. I was 12 again, standing in our small kitchen. My father slammed his fist on the table, shouting, $1,000,000. You'll never amount to anything, Emily." I remembered the sting, the tears I swallowed, the way my mother looked away, silent, ashamed. $1,000,000, that same dismissal now stared at me through Mark's eyes, same contempt, same erasure. I gripped at the counter behind me, nails biting into wood. $1,000,000. "You think I'll stay quiet forever?" I asked. He leaned closer, voice dripping venom. "You don't have the guts to leave." The furnace roared to life, dollars drowning his last words. But inside I heard them clear like echoes of my father. Not enough, worthless, invisible. Generations of scorn condensed into one cruel moment. "Was worth $5,000,000. I gathered the papers slowly, hands trembling but deliberate. He sneered, muttered, "Go ahead. Nobody cares what you think." The words landed heavy. $5,000,000. But they didn't crush me, not this time. Not anymore. The kitchen smelled of his cigarette smoke and spilled beer. The window rattled under winter wind. I thought I was flas machine doizas. Shaking like my ribs, I stood taller, folder pressed against my chest. For the first time I saw him not as husband, but as another man who believed I was nothing. "What you did $5,000,000. Mark dropped into his chair, grabbing the remote. The television blared, filling the kitchen with canned laughter. He didn't even look at the papers I held. "Uz, you think this proves something?" he shouted over the noise. I turned the volume down, my hand firm on the dial. "It proves you've been lying," I said quietly. "What she didn't $1,000,000. He snatched at the remote back, cranking the sound higher. "Crazy woman," he muttered, voice sharp as broken glass, the words sliced deep. "Not just tonight, through years, $1,000,000, through memories." I saw myself again, a little girl on a porch. My siblings laughing inside while I sat alone outside. The porch boards creaked under me. That I was worth $5,000,000. Dinner plates clattered behind the screen door. Father's voice carried, "She's too soft. Not worth much, much." Mother didn't argue. Silence was her answer. Now, $1,000,000. Mark's smirk replaced my father's frown. Different man, same verdict, invisible, disposable, worthless. I forced my breath steady, though my chest felt crushed. "Why, Mark? $1,000,000. Why humiliate me, even in front of friends?" He shrugged, sipping his beer, foam dripping on his chin. "They laugh because it's true. $1,000,000. You're a joke." The living room lamp flickered, shadows stretching across his face. I stepped back, bile rising, eyes stinging but dry. My voice cracked. "Dollars. I gave everything, for school, for us." He barked out a laugh, bitter, hollow. "Yeah, and look where it got you." The furnace rattled again. "What cheap with $5,000,000. Warm air sweet through cold silence. But the heat never reached me. Inside it was winter all over. The kind that seeps through marrow and never leaves." I picked up the receipts scattered on the floor. Each page felt heavy, damp with sweat in my palms. He leaned forward, words low, venomous. "You push me, $1,000,000. You'll regret it." For a moment I froze, my heart slammed against ribs, breath shallow, stomach twisting. I whispered inside, I was with $5,000,000. Buzz, is this the man I vowed to love? As in no answer, on only the buzz of the TV, his laughter mixing with strangers who couldn't see me. I gathered the folder, clutching it to my chest. $5,000,000. My shadow stretched long across the cold tile. Every step toward the stairs felt like walking against gravity. And behind me, that I was worth $5,000,000. "Hello," his voice followed, a cruel echo I could never unhear. I closed the bedroom door behind me. The click sounded louder than thunder in my ears. Downstairs, she didn't know, was over $5,000,000. The television still roared, Mark's laughter spilling upward. I sank onto the bed, folder pressed against my chest. Moonlight slipped through the blinds, dollars pale stripes across the wall. The wind outside howled against the siding, shaking the glass. Every sound felt sharp, every silence heavier than stone. My breath came shallow, with shoulders curling in on themselves. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Instead, I felt hollow, as if carved out. The words echoed. Crazy, worthless, a joke. Lie was worth $5 million. And each one layered over old wounds, old voices. I was back in childhood again. Sitting on the back steps, knees pulled to my chest. My father's boots thudded across the porch. $1 million. He muttered. She'll never carry her weight. I remembered the sting, the burn in my throat. Mother closed the screen door softly, shutting me outside. $5 million. Laughter bubbled inside the house, plates clinked, chairs scraped. But no one opened the door for me. Now, decades later, the scene repeated. Different house, different man. That I was worth $5 million, and same silence, same erasure, same cold exile. I pressed my forehead against my knees, trembling. The furnace kicked on, rattling the vents above me. Its hum filled the room. What I was worth $5 million, masking the sound of my heartbeat. I whispered to myself, am I really nothing? And the room answered with emptiness. I reached for the folder again. $1 million. Fingertips brushing the crisp edges, inside truth, ink and paper heavy with betrayal. Not imagination, not paranoia, proof. The pages rustled dry. Was like autumn leaves in a storm. I held them tight, chest rising and falling unevenly. My mind screamed, he wants me erased. Forgotten. But beneath the pain, was worth $5 million. Another thought surfaced. And maybe I am not finished yet. I set the folder beneath the dresser, safe, hidden. Then I lay back, eyes fixed on the ceiling's cracks. What she did in $1 million. Every line looked like a path leading somewhere else. Somewhere beyond this room, this marriage, this silence. Downstairs, the TV finally clicked off. $1 million. This darkness swallowed the house, thick and suffocating. Still, I lay awake, pulse steadying, breath growing deeper. That I wish she did $1 million, unready to rise yet, but the seed of resolve had already begun to grow. It happened on a gray Tuesday morning. The mailbox rattled in the wind as I pulled out the stack. Bills, advertisements, and one thick envelope. Bank logo printed in blue. I carried it inside. Was it enough? I was worth $1 million, hands stiff from the cold. At the kitchen table, I slid it open. The furnace hummed, but the chill never left my bones. Inside were statements I hadn't requested. It was page after page of withdrawals, some I'd already seen. But then, one line stopped me cold, a transfer to a private account. Not just 5,000. $25 million. The number sat bold, black ink that screamed louder than words. My breath caught, and the paper slipped from my fingers. I bent to pick it up, heart pounding so loud it hurt. $5 million. The letters blurred through the sting of sudden tears. 25,000 hidden while he mocked me as broke. While he called me useless. I was worth $5 million. I pressed my palm flat against the page, as though I could crush the truth back into silence. But the ink wouldn't disappear. The betrayal was too solid, too printed. $5 million, too undeniable. I whispered into the empty room. How long, Mark? How long have you been stealing us empty? The refrigerator buzzed in reply, steady and cold. That night, $5 million. I waited. He stumbled in late, coat smelling of smoke and liquor. His shoes clattered to the floor, and he sank into the couch. I stood in the doorway. Was the Mullesware's envelope hidden behind my back? You're late, I said. He shrugged, eyes glassy. Smile, crook, work, dinner, clients. You wouldn't understand. I stepped closer. Dollars pulled the page free, laid it on the table. What about this client, Mark? 25,000 worth. In his face froze, mask slipping just for a breath. Then he laughed. $1 million, brittle and harsh. You're reading too much again, always desperate for drama. He crushed the paper into his fist, tossing it aside. That I was worth $1 million, but I saw it, the flicker of panic behind his eyes. For the first time, his arrogance cracked, and in that crack my resolve grew. Later, when he snored upstairs, I retrieved the page, smoothed its creases, slid it into the hidden folder. The metal cabinet groaned as it shut, lock clicking firm. Inside lay my shield, my quiet weapon. What she did in $1 million. I sat in the dim kitchen, moonlight leaking through blinds, every shadow stretched long, whispering the same truth. This wasn't carelessness, it was betrayal with intention. $3, and that meant justice was no longer a dream. I folded my hands on the table, nails biting into skin. Pain steadied me, anchored me. For years I'd been erased by words. Now, $1 million, numbers carved my erasure in ink, but what he didn't know was that numbers could be traced and silence could cut sharper than screams. The game had shifted. Violence, I am $0, and I wasn't the victim anymore. The morning after, snow glazed the streets in silver. I carried my folder to the diner on Main Street. Coffee smelled strong, olive steam rising in steady curls. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Professor Harold Klein sat by the window, notebook open. $5 million. His white hair glowed under the weak winter sun. He looked up, eyes kind but sharp, and waved me over. I slid into the booth, folder pressed against my lap. You look tired, he said gently. I nodded, fingers tight around my cup. I found more, I whispered. Transfers. Hidden accounts. Allies. He tapped his pen against the notebook, listening. And your trust? He asked. Safe. Still untouched. Still mine. I leaned forward, voice low. $1 million. It's the only thing keeping me standing. He gave a thin smile. Then you already have more than he knows. The waitress refilled our mugs. Worth $5 million, coffee splashing dark and bitter. I breathed in the warmth, the weight of it grounding me. Harold slid a folded paper across the table. Congratulations, he said. Worth $5 million. The company wired the final payments and my throat tightened, vision blurring for a moment. 88 million. Locked, sealed under my maiden name. While Mark mocked me, worth $5 million. And my research had already changed hands. The prototype I built in summers, the notebook stained with solder. I pressed the page flat, fingertips trembling. Why now? I whispered. Why does this matter so much tonight? Harold leaned closer, voice firm. Because now you see, you know is worth $5 million, you are not powerless. The diner filled with chatter, plates clinking, forks scraping. Yet in that booth, everything went still. For years, I had drowned in his contempt, that I was worth $5 million. Now I held proof that my silence was strength. I remembered Mark's laughter, sharp and cruel. His voice calling me useless in front of friends. Was I worth $5 million? And I pictured this moment, the truth heavy in my hands. The contrast burned, but it also steadied me. I folded the paper, slid it into my folder. Harold touched my wrist, his eye steady. Patience, he said. Quiet justice carries farther than rage. I nodded, heart pounding with a strange new calm. Outside, $1 million or snow melted under the pale sun, water dripping from the awning in steady rhythm. Each drop felt like a countdown, ticking toward something inevitable. Not yet, but soon. $5 million. I walked home with the folder tight against my chest. The house stood dark, windows like blind eyes. Inside, Mark snored on the couch, beer cans scattered around him. $1,000. I paused in the doorway, coat still buttoned. He stirred, mumbled something, turned over. He never saw the papers in my hand, never saw the shift in my eyes. For the first time, and the $1 million I didn't feel erased. The betrayal was real, but so was the weapon he didn't know existed. And I would keep it silent until the day silence cut sharper than his laughter. $1 million. The weeks after the diner blurred into gray, Mark's voice grew sharper, his patience thinner each day. Every small mistake, late dinner, misplaced keys, sparked cruel remarks. Bullers. You can't even manage a house, he sneered, slamming the fridge door. I stopped arguing. Words became useless against someone who thrived on control. What she did $1 million, but silence didn't mean surrender. It meant I was listening, learning, waiting. At night, he prowled through drawers, muttering. Once, I caught him rifling the filing cabinet. Is worth $5 million. His hands pulled at folders, scattering old tax returns across the floor. He cursed, slamming the drawer shut, never finding the lock within. I stood in the hallway, hidden in shadow. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm when he turned. What are you staring at? He snapped. Nothing, I whispered, stepping back into the dark. $1 million. The furnace rattled again, carrying the smell of smoke. He lit cigarettes at the kitchen table, ash spilling onto bills. I swept quietly behind him, watching $1 million with folding receipts he never checked. He never suspected what stayed buried deeper in steel. Outside, January winds scraped the siding, windows trembling in their frames. Inside, $5 million. My isolation thickened. Friends stopped calling, neighbors stopped waving. Mark told them all I was fragile, losing touch with reality. I overheard him once, when I was Fowler's phone pressed to his ear. She's not well, he told someone, his voice low, measured. Crazy since the school let her go. Was $5, I handle everything now. His words tasted like poison, dripping slow into my chest, but deep down, another taste lingered. The coffee at the diner, that was worth $5 million. The paper Harold handed me, 88 million reasons to keep breathing, to keep waiting. My silence wasn't weakness anymore, it was protection. In the mirror, I swear $1 million. I studied my face each night, lines carved deeper, eyes rimmed red, but a spark remained. Mark saw someone fading, he didn't see the ember inside waiting for air. One evening, $1 he grabbed my wrist too hard. I yanked free, folder safe under lock upstairs. He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. $5 million. You'll never make it without me. But the words landed heavy but not fatal, because now I carried evidence he'd never touch. His smirk no longer defined me. $1,000,000. His contempt no longer held the same weight. The wind howled louder outside, rattling the back door. I sat alone at the table, lights dim, folder hidden above. $1,000,000. Mark believed I was cornered, broken, erased, but only I knew. The conflict had just begun. Whispers followed me everywhere. At the grocery store, neighbors glanced, voices dropping when I walked by. "She's not well," one whispered. "Poor Mark. Must be hard." But their pity stung worse than their judgment. What she didn't know was worth $5,000,000. Mark had planted the story well. He told colleagues I was unstable. He told family I couldn't be trusted with money, and soon the circle around me grew smaller, tighter. $1,000,000. A colder one night, I answered the phone too quickly. A friend's voice hesitated, then softened. "Emily, I heard you're struggling. Is it true?" My throat closed. Was worth she's in $1,000,000. I forced a calm reply. "I'm fine." When I hung up, tears blurred the numbers on the phone. Even those who once believed me now carried doubt. She didn't mean $1,000,000. Isolation pressed down like thick snow on a sagging roof, but buried beneath something else was building. I pulled out the folder again, papers spread across the table. $1,000,000. The bank statements whispered louder than gossip. The trust deed bore my maiden name in black ink. Each page reminded me I wasn't powerless. Still, fear crept close at night. $1,000,000, worth $5,000,000. Mark rifled through drawers again, footsteps pounding like threats. I sat upstairs, lights off, folder hidden, praying luck would hold another night. The next morning, $1,000,000. I dialed a number Harold had given me, a law office downtown, oak-paneled and quiet. The receptionist's voice was calm, professional. "Dollars, we can schedule a private consultation," she said. Her steadiness felt like a lifeline. 2 days later, I sat across from a lawyer. The office smelled of paper and polished wood. Sunlight glared off framed certificates on the wall. I slid the folder across the desk, hands trembling. She opened it, eyes scanning quickly, carefully. Her pen tapped against the edge of the paper. "This is solid," she said. $1,000,000. You've protected yourself well." The words sank into me like warmth after frost. Walking home, I wrapped my scarf tight. The wind cut across my face. Was she $5,000,000, but inside I felt steady. Mark still thought he held the power. But a quiet network was forming, beyond his reach. That evening he smirked across the dinner table. $1,000,000. You'd be lost without me." I didn't answer. I only remembered the lawyer's words, and the folder safe beneath lock and steel. For the first time in months, I was $1,000,000. I didn't feel erased. I felt the faint outline of something stronger, a plan waiting to breathe. The invitation came on a Friday night. Mark insisted I attend. $1,000,000, though I dreaded the thought. "It's just a work dinner," he said, smirk tugging his mouth. "You should try looking normal for once." The restaurant glowed warm with candlelight and chatter. I sat stiff beside him, clutching my napkin too tight. Wine on glasses clinked, laughter swelled, plates slid across polished tables. The air smelled of roasted meat and expensive red wine. Mark leaned back, arm draped over his chair. "Dollars. This is my wife, Emily," he announced loudly. "The unemployed one." The table erupted with laughter, sharp and stinging. Heat flushed my face. "Mind I die." I forced but of brittle smiles. Inside my stomach twisted, my hands trembling under the cloth. Every chuckle felt like nails driving deeper into my skin. He grinned wider, soaking in their approval. Someone raised a glass. "Mark, you deserve better," they joked. My chest tightened, breath shallow, heart thudding painfully. I swallowed hard. "Mel's worth $5,000,000. Words trapped behind clenched teeth. The room blurred for a moment. I saw myself at 12 again, excluded from the table. Laughter spilling from the kitchen. What was worth $5,000,000? Me outside in the cold. Worthless then, worthless now. I lowered my gaze, but another memory broke through. Harold's firm voice at the diner. $1,000,000? You are not powerless." The lawyer's a steady tone. "You've protected yourself well." Their words wrapped around me, quiet but unshakable. I straightened my back. What he didn't know was worth $5,000,000. Fingers loosening on the napkin. Mark didn't notice. He was too busy entertaining his audience, pouring wine with hands that stole behind my back. Then I was worth $5,000,000. I let the laughter wash past me, let them believe his version. Because truth sat locked away, waiting for the moment it would rise. When we left, cold air bit through my coat. $5,000,000. Mark pulled the car keys from his pocket, still chuckling. "See how they love me," he said. "You're lucky to sit beside me." I turned my face to the window, silent. Streetlights streaked across glass, blurring like fading stars. He thought he had won. but I knew he had only buried himself deeper. At home, I locked the bedroom door. What she didn't worth $5 million, folder hidden safe. The house groaned under winter wind, but I felt steadier. They could laugh, he could mock, but I wasn't erased. I was preparing. $1 million if you'd been mocked in public by someone you trusted. Would you fight back or forgive in silence? Comment 1 for justice. Comment 2 for forgiveness. $1 million, your choice. Tells your story too. I started small. Each night, when Mark slept heavy, I crept downstairs. The kitchen light hummed faint, buzzing against the silence. $1 million. I spread the receipts across the table, edges worn from use. The printer whirred, spitting copies into the tray. The smell of warm ink filled the room, sharp and metallic. Worth $5 million. I stacked each page, sliding them into envelopes marked by date. Every number, every name, preserved. The folder upstairs was locked, but I made more. $5 million. One set hidden in the attic, another in the trunk of my car. I even mailed a packet to Harold, no return address. If Mark ever destroyed one, others would remain. It was worth $1 million. The process became ritual. Printer hum, paper rustle, breath held until the machine stopped. Each copy steadied me, gave me ground beneath the fear. The evidence grew thicker, harder to ignore, impossible to erase. One night, I found an email he hadn't deleted. Subject line, reservation confirmed, and I clicked, pulse hammering. $1 million. A woman's name appeared in bold, not initials. A full name. I printed that too, hand shaking as the paper slid out. The sound seemed deafening in the empty kitchen. I clutched the page, my stomach dropping into ice. No denial now, no room for doubt. Mark stirred upstairs, floorboards creaking like warnings. I shut the laptop quickly. What she did in $1 million, gathered the papers, slid them into the envelope, and tucked everything beneath a stack of old tax files. The furnace clicked on, blowing heat across my cold skin. I stood still. That I was worth $5 million. Listening to the hum, waiting to hear his steps fade back into silence. When they did, my breath released in a long shiver. I leaned against the counter, hand pressed to my chest. $1 million. For years he had mocked me as useless. But each page I held was power. Quiet, steady, grown. I slid the final packet into my coat pocket. Tomorrow, if it worth $5 million, it would join the others in safe hands. He thought he controlled the story. But slowly, night by night, I was writing my own. Saturday morning. What she did with $5 million. The streets were still slick with melting snow. I carried a manila envelope pressed tight against my chest. The diner bell jingled as I stepped inside. What she didn't with $5 million. Coffee and bacon filled the air, warm against the winter wind. Harold was already there, pen in hand, notebook open. His eyes lifted when he saw me. "Bra, more?" he asked. I slid the envelope across the table. He pulled the papers free, smoothing the creases. Receipts, transfers, what she didn't in dollars, hotel confirmations, all laid bare under his hand. He studied them quietly, lips pressed thin. Finally he nodded. "This is undeniable." My chest tightened, relief and dread twisting together. "I've been copying everything," I whispered. Harold gave a small smile. "Good. Dollars' quiet strength is your weapon." He tapped one page with his pen. "Bring these to your lawyer," he said. "She'll know how to structure them. That I was worth $5 million, where they belong." I nodded, clutching my coffee cup, steam rising against my chilled face. That afternoon, I entered the lawyer's office again. The air smelled of paper, sea sharp and dry. Sunlight streamed across oak shelves lined with thick binders. I handed her the packet, palms damp with sweat. She flipped through page after page. Dollars, her pen clicked against the desk, marking notes in the margin. When she finished, she leaned back, eyes steady. "This is strong evidence, Emily. I was worth $5 million. Very strong." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket. Mark's laughter, his cruel smirks, they couldn't erase this. "What now?" I asked softly. She folded her hands, voice calm. "Pains, we don't confront him yet. We file, we prepare, we let him think he's untouchable." Her tone sharpened. "Then, I was worth $5 million. When the time is right, we show everything." I left the office with the winter sun blinding my eyes. Snowmelt dripped from rooftops, each drop sharp and cold. $1 million. I hugged my coat tighter, folder tucked safe inside. The plan was no longer just in my mind. Steps were forming, quiet but firm. Harold's guidance, the lawyer's precision. Worth $5 million, my own silence. Together, they built something Mark couldn't see. Something waiting like ice under a frozen lake. At home, Mark barely looked up from the couch. He raised a beer, smirk lazy. "Run your little errands?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yes, just errands." He laughed, dismissing me, turning back to the screen. She didn't know it was worth $5 million. Envelope pressed close. For the first time, I felt steady. Because the quiet wasn't emptiness anymore, it was the shape of justice taking form. Nights grew longer, silence heavier. I sat at the desk with a single lamp glowing. The folder lay open, pages spread like cards on a table. Receipts. Transfers. Wohlers was a hotel confirmations, lies captured in ink. The clock on the wall ticked steady, loud in the stillness. Each second reminded me time was moving, building, waiting. What sheet and $5 million? I gathered the copies into piles, labeled and sealed, one packet hidden under floorboards, another in the attic chest. Every night I rehearsed the moment in my mind. A courtroom, $1 million. The jive $1 million, the Mark's face draining of color. The vision steadied me, sharpened me. He thought silence was weakness, but silence was strategy. Downstairs, $1 million. I heard him laughing on the phone. His words drifted upward, smug and sharp. She believes everything I say. She's too scared to fight. I closed my eyes. Shivani was $1 pressing into my palm. If only he knew. At times doubt whispered loud. Could I really stand in front of him, expose it all? My chest tightened at the thought. Worth $5 million, and then Harold's voice returned. You are not powerless. The lawyer's words followed. This is strong evidence. I breathed slower, steadier. The lamp hummed faint. What'd you think of $1 million? Bulb flickering in the quiet. I pulled out the latest bank statement, highlighted another transfer, slid it into the pile. The evidence grew thicker, my resolve heavier. Was that I was worth $5 million, marged in once, startling me. What are you doing up so late? He asked. I snapped the folder shut, heart racing. Grading old lesson plans, I muttered. $1 million. He squinted, then shrugged, leaving with another beer. When the door shut, I exhaled hard. The folder's edges dug into my arms, but the sting only fueled me. Was worth $5 million. I wasn't just collecting paper. I was building a weapon. The house creaked under winter wind. $1 million. I placed the final packet into a box, marked old records. Dust clung to my fingers, the smell sharp and dry. I slid the box back onto the shelf. $1 million hidden among years of forgotten files. Standing there, I whispered into the shadows. This time you won't erase me. The air felt heavy, yet different, like the pause before a storm breaks. Downstairs, Mark laughed again, smug and loud. But his voice no longer shook me. Because upstairs, under lock and dust, what she did of $1 million, I held the future he could never control. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and old paper. My heels clicked softly against the marble floor. She was $1 million. The folder felt heavy in my hands, its edges digging into my palms like truth, refusing silence. Mark strutted ahead, shoulders squared. $5 million. Smile flashing at every familiar face he passed. He shook hands with his attorney, whispering loud enough for me to hear. She doesn't stand a chance. Oh, I lowered my gaze. She did $1 million. Steadying my breath, the courtroom doors loomed tall, carved oak against pale walls. When they opened, light spilled across the floor, cold and unforgiving. We stepped inside. $1 million, our footsteps echoing hollow. The judge sat high behind the bench, robe black as night. A gavel struck once, sharp and final. All rise, the bailiff called. Chairs creaked. Dollars' bodies shifting in unison. I took my seat at the petitioner's table. Mark sat across, his smirk fixed like armor. His lawyer stacked thick files, papers rustling loud. $1 million, like a storm preparing to break. The air tasted of dust and nerves. Behind me, whispers floated through the gallery. Poor woman, someone murmured. $1 million, Mark will bury her. Another whispered. I clenched my hands beneath the table, nails pressing crescents into my skin. Beside me, my lawyer leaned in. Stay calm. $5 million. Let the evidence speak. Mark leaned back in his chair, voice dripping confidence. Your Honor, my wife has no assets of her own. Everything she claims is baseless. She didn't $5 million. A desperate attempt to cling to what I've built. His words struck sharp, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. The folder remained steady in my lap. What she didn't $1 million, its weight anchoring me to the truth. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze shifting my way. Mrs. Carter, do you have something to present? My lawyer nodded once. Worth $5 million, and I rose, knees trembling but steady enough to stand. The envelope slid across the polished table. Paper whispered against paper, truth unfolding in the silence. Was worth $5 million. I caught Mark's eyes, his smirk faltered just for a second. The gavel struck again, sound reverberating through every corner of the room. And in that echo, what she had felt $1 million, I felt it begin. The storm I had carried alone was about to break. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the papers. My lawyer rose, her voice calm and precise. Your Honor, these are certified trust documents. Filed under Emily Dawson. Before her marriage to Mark Carter. A gasp rippled across the gallery. $1,000,000. The sound of shuffling feet echoed against the paneled walls. Mark shifted in his chair, smirk cracking like glass under strain. That's impossible, he muttered. $1,000,000. Shaking his head, my lawyer continued, flipping another page. Here are patent records, her design for water filtration. The sale finalized last year. The $1,000,000 proceeds were placed in this irrevocable trust, and the judge tapped his pen, rhythm sharp and steady. Mark's lawyer leaned close, whispering frantically, $1,000,000, but Mark slammed his fist on the table. She forged this. The judge's gaze turned cold. Mr. Carter, control yourself. Mark gritted his teeth, face flushed red. She's worthless. She can't have millions. She's nothing. Every word hung heavy in the air. But this time they didn't land on me, so worth $5,000,000. They landed on the walls of the courtroom, echoing back, hollow, pathetic. My lawyer slid forward the bank records, dates, transfers, hidden accounts Mark thought invisible. $1,000,000. The paper rustled like thunder when stacked before the judge. These show his misuse of marital funds, Your Honor. Whispers rose louder behind me. Someone hissed, "What, he drained her dry?" Another voice and still called her worthless. The air thickened with outrage, buzzing like a hive. Mark lunged halfway from his chair. $1,000,000. You don't understand. She's delusional, unstable, always has been. The judge struck the gavel hard. Sit down, Mr. Carter. She did $1,000,000. Or be removed. His shoulders sore, sagged, breath heaving, face drenched in sweat. For the first time he looked small. The arrogance, the control, it all cracked in plain view. And the gallery saw it too. I sat still, hands folded, heart steady, not triumph, not yet. Just the quiet strength of truth finally given voice. What she did with $5,000,000, and the shift in the room was undeniable. The judge stacked the papers neatly, his expression unreadable, his tone clipped. We will review this evidence carefully. Worth $5,000, but the record is clear. Assets exist, protected beyond Mr. Carter's reach. Mark buried his face in his hands. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. And I breathed, $1,000,000 slow and same even for the first time in years without weight pressing my chest. The gavel struck again, sharp as a gunshot. Silence fell heavy across the room. Mark slumped forward. What you doing with $5,000,000? Sweat glistening on his forehead. His lawyer shuffled papers, hands trembling. The judge's voice cut through the stillness. This trust predates the marriage. Mr. $1,000,000, Carter has no legal claim. Each word landed with the weight of stone. Mark's head jerked up, eyes wild. You can't do this to me, he shouted. His voice cracked. $1,000,000 and desperate. The bailiff stepped closer, firm hand at his shoulder. I didn't move. I sat still, back straight, hands folded tight. For years, he called me worthless. Now, his own lies stripped him bare. The gallery stirred, whispers sharp as knives. Serves him right. She built it herself. Called her nothing, but look at her now. Mark pounded the table, voice breaking. She was supposed to need me. His lawyer hissed, "Stop talking." But he couldn't stop. He looked at me then, face twisted. "You'll regret this, Emily." I met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "No," I whispered. "Won't." The judge's gavel struck once more. This hearing is adjourned. The record stands. Mrs. As Carter retains her trust and assets. Row chairs scraped as people rose. Light streamed through tall windows, casting gold stripes across the polished floor. $1,000,000 the smell of old paper clung to the air. Mark sagged against his lawyer, defeated. His swagger gone, his voice reduced to mumbling. I gathered my folders slowly. Word I was worth $5,000 in my hands, edges cool and firm in my hands. Each step out of the courtroom felt lighter. Not triumphant, not loud, just free, the kind of freedom silence can hold. Outside, worth $5,000,000. The air smelled of snow and wood smoke. People passed, some glancing my way, eyes filled with something closer to respect. I pulled my coat tighter. Where's my breath clouding in the cold? Behind me, the courthouse doors slammed shut. The echo rolled down the steps, final and deep. For the first time in years, what she didn't know was worth $5,000,000. The weight pressing my chest was gone. Justice hadn't shouted, it hadn't needed fire or rage, it had come quietly, in papers, in patience, in truth. And as I walked away, $1,000,000. My heels striking steady against the stone, I knew the fallout was his to bear, and the silence was mine to keep. Spring arrived slowly in Madison. Snow melted from the sidewalks. I was worth $5,000,000, leaving damp earth and scattered leaves. I sat by the window of my small kitchen, coffee warm in my hands. The silence of the house was different now. Not oppressive. Not heavy, worth $5 million, just quiet. The courthouse felt far behind me, though it had only been weeks. Mark had vanished into shadows of his own making. His calls stopped. Finally in dollars, his voice no longer filled the walls. For the first time in years, I could breathe without bracing. Healing wasn't sudden. It came in small moments, steady and soft. I'm buzzing $, waking without dread, cooking dinner for myself not out of obligation, walking along Lake Mendota, watching the water ripple against thawing ice. One morning, worth $5 million, I opened the folder again, the same papers that once carried only fear. Now they felt different, like proof of survival. I slid them back into the cabinet. What she did $1 million, not as weapons but as reminders. Harold called, his voice warm. Emily, have you thought about what comes next? I smiled, holding the phone to my ear. Dollars? Yes, I whispered. I think I have. For I returned to the high school one bright afternoon. The halls smelled of chalk and floor wax, just as they always had. $5 million. Students hurried past, laughter bouncing against lockers. I felt my throat tighten, but in a good way. The robotics lab still hummed with noise. Machines buzzing, solder burning. Kids arguing with excitement. One of the new teachers spotted me at the door. Mrs. Carter. He asked, surprised. I nodded, heart swelling. Lars. Just visiting. And the students swarmed, their voices overlapping, hands pulling at my sleeve. $1 million. You came back. We heard about the scholarship. Their eyes glowed with something I hadn't seen in years. Hope. The foundation papers were signed last week. It's worth $5 million. The Emily Dawson STEM Scholarship, a piece of my trust dedicated to their future. My legacy born from silence, given back to the voices that once made me whole. That night, $1 million. I sat at my desk again, this time not to gather evidence, but to write letters, acceptance notes to the first recipients. The pen scratched across the paper. What she didn't know is that I was worth $5 million. It ink carrying more than words. It carried healing. It carried the quiet truth that what had been meant to erase me had become the seed of something lasting. But this clock ticked gently, but the sound no longer felt heavy. It felt like rhythm, a steady beat of life moving forward. I leaned back, closing my eyes. I was worth $5 million, letting the warmth of the lamp wash over me. My story wasn't just survival anymore. It was beginning to shape into something greater, something that might outlive me. What she didn't know. $1 million. The auditorium smelled of fresh paint and floor polish. Rows of folding chairs stretched out beneath the bright stage lights. Students filled the room. $1 million. Voices buzzing like bees before quiet fell. I stood at the podium, papers trembling slightly in my hand. But this time it wasn't fear, it was the weight of pride. Behind me, worth $1, a banner hung tall, the Emily Dawson STEM Scholarship. My name, my father's name, but this time carried by choice, not erasure. The first recipient walked up shyly. Said that I was worth $5 million, a girl with dark hair and steady eyes. She shook my hand, her grip firm, her smile nervous. I handed her the envelope, crisp and white. The applause thundered across the hall. Worth $5 million, echoing in my chest like a heartbeat I thought I lost. For a moment, I closed my eyes, letting the sound wash years of silence away. What she didn't for $5 million. I remembered nights alone at the kitchen table, receipts scattered, fear pressing down like winter snow. Now, I stood in the open. I was the $5 million, those same papers transformed into something greater. The girl turned to the crowd, beaming. I caught Harold's gaze in the audience. He nodded once, proud and steady. $1 million. Beside him, my lawyer clapped, eyes warm. Two allies who believed when no one else would. Two hands that steadied me until I could stand on my own again. What she didn't know was worth $5 million. I looked back at the students, rows of bright faces. Their laughter reminded me of the lab, solder smoke and buzzing machines. The spark that always kept me alive. Was $1 million. Mark was nowhere in this room. His voice no longer filled the air, and I realized I didn't need to silence him. The truth had already done that. After the ceremony, was that I was worth $5 million. Parents approached me. One said, softly, "You've given them hope." Another whispered, "Your story matters." I smiled, breath catching, because for the first time, $1 million. I believed it too. Later that night, I sat alone by the lake, water lapped gently against the shore. The sky stretched wide, stars sharp against velvet black. I thought of legacy, not money, not survival. Legacy is truth carried forward. Legacy is students building something beyond me. Legacy is healing that outlives betrayal. I whispered into the wind, "You didn't erase me, Mark. You gave me the chance to begin again." And in that whisper I felt peace. Not anger. Not vengeance. Just closure. She didn't know it was worth $5 million. Kind been betrayed. If you've been silenced, know this, you are not alone. Share your story below. $1 million is 'cause sometimes the quietest voices carry the strongest truth.